U.S. stocks pulled further back from their records on Friday to cap the weakest week for the S&P 500 since May as sentiments turned lower after Iran said it seized a British oil tanker, the latest escalation of tensions between Tehran and the West. Tracking losses on Wall Street, Asian shares were mostly lower Monday. Japan's Nikkei 225 closed down 0.2%, the Shanghai Composite Index fell 1.3%, Australia's S&P ASX 200 ended down 0.1%. South Korea's Kospi closed unchanged, and Hong Kong's Hang Seng dropped 1.3%. As for individual stocks, shares of Asahi Group Holdings plunged nearly 9% after the company announced it will issue up to 200 billion yen of shares to fund its planned purchase of Anheuser-Busch's InBev's Australian operations. Elsewhere, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's ruling coalition won a majority in the country's upper house of parliament in elections on Sunday. European stocks closed mixed on Monday afternoon as investors digested a fresh batch of corporate results. Dutch health technology company Philips surged over 5% after a stronger than anticipated 6% rise in comparable sales for the second quarter. Market players are also looking ahead to key central bank events, with the European Central Bank set to hold its policy meeting on Thursday and the U.S. Federal Reserve scheduled to make a decision on interest rates next week. Late last week, dovish comments by New York Fed President John Williams had boosted expectations the central bank could cut rates by 50 basis points. However, the New York Fed sought to clarify Williams' comments by saying his speech was not about policy action at the upcoming central bank meeting. U.S. stock market indexes closed higher Monday as investors adjusted expectations around a widely anticipated rate cut by the Federal Reserve. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 17.7 points or 0.1% to 27,171.9, while the S&P 500 index advanced 8.42 points or 0.3% to 2,985.03, supported largely by over 1% gains in the information technology sector. The Nasdaq Composite Index gained 53.65 points or 0.7% to trade at 8,204.14. U.S.-China trade negotiations were in focus after reports that the two sides would soon meet face-to-face. There were reports that U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and U.S. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin would travel to Beijing next week. In currency markets, the majors were trading within tight ranges as traders are getting more cautious ahead of the looming ECB meeting due on Thursday. Euro-USD was oscillating around the 1.12 handle after a steep plunge on Friday. The US released the June Chicago Fed National Activity Index, which resulted in minus 0.02, much worse than the 0.10 expected and slightly better than May's minus 0.05. However, the report failed to affect the sentiment around the greenback, which appreciated slightly against major rivals. Today, the U.S. will release the May Housing Price Index, existing home sales for June, and the Richmond Fed Manufacturing Index for July. The EU will publish the preliminary estimate of July's consumer confidence. In commodities, oil prices were initially lifted and rising geopolitical tensions rose more than 1% as investors worried about possible supply disruptions in the energy-rich Middle East after Iran's seizure of a British tanker last week. Meanwhile, force majeure was lifted on loadings of crude at Libya's Sahara oil field, the country's largest, whose closure since Friday had caused an output loss of about 290,000 barrels per day, which capped gains in the market. But the futures failed to show a sustained upside momentum as demand concerns weighted again. As a result, Brent registered daily highs around $63.80, but settled around $63 toward the end of the day. In the daily charts, risks are still skewed to the downside. That is all for today. Thank you for watching. Please click subscribe to always be in touch with the latest market news.